So you've all sent in some pretty interesting stuff for us to look at this time, and it all seems to be about taxes.
Yeah.
Which, not always the most exciting topic, but definitely important.
Absolutely. Taxes touch every part of our lives.
For sure. And the stuff you sent, it looks like we're going deep into Nepal's tax system.
Right. Seems to be a lot of discussion about that.
Yeah, so I guess our mission this time is to, really get into the nuts and bolts of how taxes work in Nepal.
Sounds good.
But also, what's coming through from all this material is the sense of, frustration.
Oh, yeah.
People are feeling the burden, maybe not even sure what they're paying for.
Makes sense. If you don't understand the system, it's hard to feel good about it.
Exactly. So we'll try to untangle that too, see if we can figure out why there's that feeling. Now, one of the documents you sent, AI taxes conversation.pdf, this one seems to be like the mother lode, right?
It's pretty comprehensive, covers a lot of ground.
Yeah, and I gotta say, the first thing that hit me was this number, 141. Potentially 141 different types of taxes in Nepal.
Wow.
I mean, just imagine that, right? You're just trying to live your life, run your business, whatever.
And you've got this huge list of potential taxes hanging over you.
It's overwhelming just thinking about it.
I just wonder how anyone's supposed to keep track of it all.
Right. And that's before we even get into the actual rates and calculations and all that.
So, yeah, definitely potential for frustration right there.
Okay, so let's try to break this down a little, at least get a handle on the basic types of taxes we're dealing with here in Nepal.
Right.
So the document, it starts with the big distinction, right? Direct taxes versus indirect taxes.
Yeah, that's the fundamental split.
So on the direct side, you've got things like income tax, hitting you straight on your earnings.
Right, and even within income tax, there are so many variations.
Oh yeah, it gets really specific, doesn't it? You've got personal income tax, spousal income tax, separate categories for small taxpayers, even non-residents.
It's all about trying to tailor the tax to different situations.
And then there's corporate income tax, but even that's broken down by industry.
Like hydropower, banking, telecommunications.
Yeah, it's almost like they're trying to micromanage every sector of the economy with its own specific tax rate.
Well, it's about recognizing that different industries have different profit margins, different challenges.
Right. So maybe the idea is to make it fairer, I guess. But I mean, just looking at this list, it's dizzying, right? And that's just income tax.
Yeah, there's more to direct taxes than just that.
Okay, so what else? What else falls under direct taxes?
Well, you've got property tax, which is another big one.
Right. And again, lots of categories there, right?
Yeah, it's not just a flat rate on every piece of property.
You've got urban property, rural property, commercial property, even vacant land.
They're all taxed differently.
And then capital gains tax, that's on the profits you make when you sell something like shares or property.
And then Social Security tax, that's a contribution from both employees and employers.
Okay, so just within direct taxes, we've already got, 5 or 6 different types.
And each of those has its own little subcategories and complexities.
Right, it's already starting to feel like that thick jungle they were talking about in the document.
Definitely.
Now let's move over to the other side, the indirect taxes. This is where VAT comes in, right?
Oh, you add a tax. Yep.
So that's that 13% you see added on to most things you buy, goods and services.
It's a consumption tax, basically.
Right, but even with VAT, there are exceptions, aren't there?
Oh, yeah. Some things are zero rated, meaning there's no VAT applied at all.
And some things are exempt, which I guess is slightly different.
Yeah, exempt means it's technically outside the scope of VAT altogether.
Okay, so what sorts of things get these special treatments?
Well, the document mentions agriculture, digital services, and tourism as being in those zero-rated or exempt categories.
Interesting. So no VAT on buying vegetables or using a ride-sharing app?
Not necessarily. It depends on the specific goods and services within those sectors.
Right, but it suggests that there are policy reasons for why those areas get special consideration.
Absolutely, like maybe encouraging growth in digital services or making sure food is affordable.
Okay, so then we've got customs duty, which is that tax on imports.
That's a big one. Lots of revenue generated there.
And the list of things they tax at the border is pretty extensive, right?
Oh, yeah. Everything from everyday consumer goods to, gold, petroleum,
And vehicle.
different types, different rates, even a discount on electric cars.
Oh, that's interesting. So they're using taxes to try and nudge people towards greener choices.
Looks like it.
Okay, so we're not even done with indirect taxes yet, right?
Who's more?
Excise duty, that's the one on things like alcohol and cigarettes, right?
And sugar, petrol, diesel, luxury goods.
It seems like they're targeting things that are either seen as unhealthy Or maybe a bit excessive.
Yeah, either to discourage consumption or because people are willing to pay more for those things.
Right, kind of like a sin tax, I guess. Okay, then you've got infrastructure taxes, which seem to be tied to things like fuel and road usage.
So you're paying for the roads you drive on, essentially.
Makes sense. And then service charge taxes. This one feels like it's on everything these days.
Telecommunications, mobile recharges, internet, cable TV.
Yeah, it's like every time you turn around, there's another service charge.
It's how they fund those services, I guess.
Right, but it can feel a bit much sometimes. So that's direct taxes, indirect taxes, and now we get to the local level, right?
Local taxes, yeah.
This is where things start to get even more complicated, I think.
It can vary a lot from one place to another.
So we've got vehicle tax again, but this time it's set by the local authorities.
And they can have different rates depending on the type of vehicle, even how old it is.
Right, so a 150cc motorcycle in one municipality might be taxed differently in another.
Exactly.
Then there's business tax, which I imagine is a whole other can of worms.
Can be. Yeah, different rates for small businesses, large businesses, specific types of businesses.
Like hotels, restaurants, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Then you've got entertainment tax on things like cinema tickets, sports events.
And tourism tax, often levied on foreign visitors, especially if they're using packages or staying in hotels.
Right, so this is all about funding local services, right?
Yeah, like garbage collection, street lighting, parks and recreation.
Makes sense. Okay, so on top of all that, we've got what the document calls special taxes.
This is where it gets interesting.
Yeah, it seems like they're constantly coming up with new ways to tax things.
Well, the economy changes, new things emerge.
Right, so one example is this digital tax.
It's a way to capture revenue from the digital economy.
So if you're making money from software, online consulting, YouTube, Facebook, that kind of thing,
You might be subject to this digital tax.
then there's an education tax specifically for people studying abroad using foreign currency.
It's like they're saying, hey, if you're getting a foreign education, you can contribute a bit extra.
Interesting. And then environmental taxes, that's another growing area.
Like taxes on emissions from older vehicles, plastic use.
Trying to encourage more sustainable behavior.
Exactly.
And then this catch-all category of other taxes.
It includes things like betting, interest earned on savings, dividends, royalties.
So basically, if you're making money in any way, they're going to find a way to tax it.
It seems that way.
Okay, so we've gone through this massive list of tax types.
It's a lot to take in.
And we haven't even touched on the rates yet. But, the document then gets into how they actually reach that number of 141 different taxes.
It's about slicing and dicing the categories.
Yeah, like taking business tax and then having a different rate for every possible industry.
Or property tax, where the rate varies not just by location, but by the type of building, the size of the land.
It's like they're taking a scalpel to the tax code and creating these tiny, hyper-specific categories.
And that's before we even get into regional differences.
Right. Each of the 7 provinces can potentially have their own versions of vehicle tax, business tax, property tax.
So that's another 21 potential variations right there.
It's mind-boggling, right? Imagine trying to keep track of all that if you're running a business across multiple provinces.
It could be a nightmare.
And then you've got municipalities and rural municipalities, each with the power to impose their own local taxes.
Like waste management fees, market access fees, parking fees.
The document suggests there could be over 50 different local taxes.
And they can vary wildly from one place to another.
Right, so you move from one municipality to the next, and suddenly you're hit with a whole new set of fees.
It's enough to make your head spin.
And then, to really push that number up to 141, they start counting all these little conditions and exemptions as separate taxes.
Like a specific rule for taxing foreign currency income, or an exemption for certain types of agricultural income.
So, yeah, it's not quite as simple as 141 completely distinct taxes.
It's more about the potential for complexity.
Right, but still, it paints a picture of a system that's incredibly detailed, incredibly fragmented.
And potentially very confusing for the average person.
Okay, so let's try to step back from the theoretical for a moment and think about what this actually means for people in Nepal.
Let's get real.
So you're a citizen, you're trying to figure out what you owe.
How do you even begin to navigate this maze?
Right, how do you know which of these 141 potential taxes actually apply to you?
It's not like they hand you a checklist.
And even if you figure out which ones apply, how do you know you're calculating them correctly?
It's ripe for errors, misunderstandings,
And what happens if you make a mistake?
penalties, fines, who knows?
It's intimidating, right? And it's no wonder people feel frustrated.
Especially if they feel like they're being nickel and dimed at every turn.
Now, the document actually goes even further and starts brainstorming even more new taxes.
Like they haven't come up with enough already.
Right. Some of them are fairly standard, like a remuneration tax, inheritance tax.
Luxury tax, carbon tax, those are all pretty common in other countries.
But then they start getting more specific, like a digital content tax, a parking tax, even a pet tax.
It's like they're trying to tax every aspect of modern life.
And then, as the document puts it, things get a bit spicy.
Spicy.
Yeah, they start talking about things like a dream tax, a social status tax, a bragging tax.
A fashion tax, a selfie rating tax, an age tax.
Even a cooking tax, a chat pay tax, a laughing tax, a crying tax.
Wait, a tax on laughing and crying?
I know, it sounds ridiculous, right? But I think it's meant to be like a satirical commentary on how far this could go.
Like the feeling that they could tax anything, no matter how absurd.
Exactly. And it taps into that fear that the tax system is just going to keep expanding and expanding.
Until it touches every part of your life.
And that you're just going to be constantly bombarded with new fees and levies.
It's like a dystopian nightmare.
Thankfully, the document then moves away from these hypothetical taxes and gets into what a typical Nepali citizen might actually pay.
All right, let's get practical.
So they use this example of Kunal's bro to illustrate the real-world tax burden.
Kunal's bro.
Yeah, I don't know who Kunal is, but his brother seems to have a pretty good grasp of the tax system. So they start with the general taxes that apply to most people, and the big one, of course, is income tax.
That's the foundation of the whole system.
And they give this specific example based on the 2080-81 budget.
Okay.
So if you're earning 1.3 million rupees a year, you're going to end up paying 145,000 rupees in income tax.
That's a significant chunk of change.
Right, and that's after all the calculations and deductions and everything.
So it's not just a small percentage, it really eats into your income.
Then you've got VAT, that 13% on most goods and services.
That's the one you encounter every day.
Every time you go to the store, every time you eat out, every time you get your hair cut.
It adds up.
Then there's Social Security tax, which is 1% of your salary if you're not in a pension scheme.
That's a smaller percentage, but it's still a deduction.
And it's specifically for social welfare programs, right?
So in theory, it's going towards things like healthcare, unemployment benefits.
Okay, so that's income tax, VAT, Social Security tax. What else?
Vehicle tax.
Right, so if you own a vehicle, you're going to be paying tax on that.
And the amount varies depending on the type of vehicle, the engine size.
They give the example of a 150cc motorcycle, which would cost you somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 rupees per year.
That's just for the tax, not including registration or insurance or anything.
Then you've got property tax.
That's a big one for homeowners.
And the rates vary depending on where you live, the value of your property.
In Kathmandu, it could be anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000 rupees per year.
And then there's land tax on top of that.
So if you own land, you're paying tax on that separately.
And that can be anywhere from 500 to 2,000 rupees per year, depending on the size and location.
So homeowners are getting hit with property tax and land tax.
It all adds up. Okay, so those are the general taxes that most people are going to pay.
Now let's talk about the ones that are specific to certain professions.
Right, because it's not a one-size-fits-all system.
Not at all.
So if you're a salaried employee, you're mainly dealing with income tax and Social Security tax.
Pretty straightforward.
But if you're a business person, it gets more complicated.
You're still paying income tax on your profits.
But you also have to collect VAT from your customers and then pay it to the government.
It's an extra administrative burden.
And if you make a mistake, I imagine the penalties can be pretty steep. Now, farmers are generally exempt from income tax, which is interesting.
It's a recognition of the importance of agriculture to the economy.
But they still have to pay land tax, of course.
Right, so they're not completely off the hook.
Professionals like lawyers, doctors, professors, they all pay income tax based on their earnings.
And if they offer private services, they might also have to collect VAT.
Just like other businesses, teachers are like other salaried employees, income tax and Social Security tax.
And laborers or workers only start paying income tax if they earn over 5 lakhs a year.
So there's a threshold there to protect low-income earners. If you're investing in the share market, you're paying capital gains tax on your profits.
But the rate is lower if you hold on to your investments for longer.
It's meant to encourage long-term investment. And then there's the casino industry, which has its own special set of rules.
Casino operators have to pay license fees.
And both operators and players pay income tax on any winnings.
It's a way to capture revenue from gambling.
Okay, so that's a pretty good overview of the profession-specific taxes.
It shows how the system is tailored to different types of economic activity.
Now, on top of all that, there are a bunch of other potential taxes that you might run into.
Like what?
Well, there's excise duty on things like alcohol, cigarettes, petrol.
Those are pretty common.
Then there's customs duty if you import goods from abroad.
Like that 15% on mobile phones.
Yeah, that one hurts. If you're renting out a property, you have to pay a 10% house rental tax.
And if you're sending your kids to study abroad, there's a 2% education tax on the foreign currency you use.
It's like they're trying to cover every base. So if you add all these up, it seems like a Nepali citizen could be paying anywhere from 12 to 15 different types of taxes.
That's a lot to keep track of.
And that's before we even get into the hidden taxes, the ones that are tucked away in the fine print.
The thick jungle.
Exactly. So let's dive into that jungle and see what we can find. One example is the road maintenance and improvement levy.
That's on petrol and diesel.
Right, so every time you fill up your tank, you're paying a little extra to maintain the roads.
It's often built into the price at the pump, so you don't even realize you're paying it.
And then there's a pollution control fee on top of that.
So you're paying for the environmental impact of driving as well.
Then there's a telephone ownership fee, 10% on every recharge or bill.
That's a pretty hefty charge.
And a tourism service fee on both domestic and international flights.
So travel's getting taxed as well.
If you go to the cinema, you're paying a 13% film hall tax on your ticket.
And if you have savings in a bank, you might be paying a 15% banking service fee tax on the interest you earn.
Even your electricity bill could have a 2% electricity service fee added to it.
And if you gamble and win, you have to pay a 25% tax on your winnings.
It's like they're finding ways to tax everything. So if we add all these hidden taxes to our list, we're now looking at potentially 20 to 22 different types of taxes.
That's a lot to keep track of.
And we're still not done because the document keeps going, challenging itself to come up with even more potential taxes.
This is getting ridiculous.
I know, right? But it shows you how much scope there is for taxation. So they start talking about a general development fee that everyone would pay annually.
And a separate entertainment tax on things like concert tickets.
Then there are local fees like parking fees, waste management fees, license renewal fees,
Forest usage fees, water fees, market fees.
the list goes on and on.
It's overwhelming.
We're now up to around 28 to 30 different types of taxes.
And we're still not done.
Nope, they keep going. Professional taxes for lawyers and engineers.
A barter service tax. I've never even heard of that.
Number taxes for clubs and gyms.
A wealth accumulation tax on large bank balances and precious metals.
Additional income tax on bonuses and overtime pay.
A community tax, a religious donation tax,
Sugar and meat taxes. Salt import tax, vehicle parts, and tire tax.
fast food and packaged food tax,
Noise pollution tax, water pollution tax, cosmetics and salon service tax.
public place tax, electricity equipment tax, water usage tax, construction tax.
Tourism activity tax, IT tax, art tax, sports equipment tax, pet tax, small business registration fee.
They're not leaving anything untaxed.
At this point, I've lost count. And then they get into these really specific, localized fees.
Like what?
Hydroelectricity fees, public toilet fees, bicycle registration fees.
Hotel service charge taxes, internet service fees, general service charges in restaurants.
Educational institution fees, small industry registration fees, irrigation fees, drinking water levies.
Streetlight fees, temple visit fees, small goods taxes, picnic spot fees, photocopy fees in government offices.
Registration fees for births, deaths, marriages, migrations, citizenship, divorce, passports, caste verification.
Land and property transfer fees, watermill fees, fishing license fees, camping fees.
Heavy vehicle taxes, small vehicle registration fees, sports ground fees, photography fees at tourist sites.
Library fees, public gathering fees, animal slaughter fees, film shooting fees in public places.
Small shop renewal fees, public bathing fees, small airport landing fees, small hydropower fees.
Import and export duties, trade and industry registration fees, goods transportation fees, market entry fees.
Advertisement board fees, warehouse fees, sales tax on top of VAT, raw material fees, franchise fees, trademark registration fees, commercial fair fees.
Insurance tax, container fees, digital service tax, advanced tax on foreign income, social media advertisement tax.
Digital platform registration fees, content monetization income tax.
I think we've officially reached the bottom of the jungle.
It's like they've thought of every possible thing to tax.
It's exhausting just listening to it all.
So I think the takeaway here is that Nepal's tax system is incredibly complex.
No kidding.
And while no one person pays all of these taxes, the sheer number and variety can be overwhelming.
And it's easy to see why people feel frustrated.
Because even if you understand the basics, there's always the sense that there might be some hidden tax you're missing.
Some fee or levy that's tucked away in the fine print.
It creates a sense of uncertainty, of distrust.
And it makes it hard to feel like the system is fair.
So I guess the question is, what can be done about it?
That's a tough one.
Because on the one hand, the government needs to generate revenue to provide services.
But on the other hand, the system needs to be simple enough for people to understand and comply with.
It's a delicate balance. So here's a thought for you, dear listener. If you could make one change to Nepal's tax system, what would it be? What would make the biggest difference for the average citizen? Would it be simplifying the system, reducing the number of taxes, or maybe increasing transparency, making it clearer how the money is being used, or something else entirely? We'd love to hear your thoughts, because ultimately, a good tax system is one that works for everyone. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.